Hello and welcome to the FATBOSS guide to Twin Ogron in Highmaul, and in this video we're going to show you tactics and information that apply both to heroic and normal difficulties of this encounter.
So this encounter consists of 2 bosses that you need to kill, and really the hard part isn't so much the individual mechanics that they have, because they don't really have too many. It's more the fact that some of them cross over and they'll actually do 2 of them at the exact same time, and that's what really the difficult part of this fight is.
Now, as Lost said, this encounter does consist of 2 bosses, and they do have a shared health pool, and another interesting thing about them is that they have an energy meter. At set energy intervals, they will do set abilities, so they'll do an ability at 33, 66, and 100% energy.
Another important thing about this encounter is that if the bosses are spread out from one another, this actually increases their casting speed, which is very, very important for certain abilities, and it also increases the amount of haste they have. Now, before we talk about any deadly crossover points, we're going to talk about the bosses individually so you guys understand all the mechanics they have. We're going to start off with Pole. He has an ability called Shield Bash. All this will do is just Shield Bash the tank, which will deal some damage, and it will also interrupt the tank.
Yeah, I'm not really sure when a tank will be doing a cast or something, but it's something to keep in mind that you probably don't want to be casting something when that comes in.
Now at 33% energy, the boss will cast an ability called Shield Charge. The boss will turn towards a distant player, will hold up his shield, and then charge towards that target. Anyone that gets hit by this charge will take damage. The further the distance the boss is charged, the more damage you'll take. Once you do get hit, you'll be knocked up in the air, and you'll also receive a physical damage dot that can actually be bopped off.
So when this ability does come in, make sure that you take note of where the boss is facing and move accordingly, because especially with other mechanics coming in at the same time, that dot alone can just completely and utterly screw over your healers trying to keep you up and everything, so make sure you do move from the shield charge. At 66% energy, the boss will cast Interrupting Shout. After a cast, he will do AoE damage to the raid and interrupt anyone casting, and they will be locked out for 6 seconds, so make sure that when this ability does come in, that you stop casting. The amount of AoE damage that he does is fairly light, so you shouldn't need to use a healing cooldown, but another thing to take into account is that if he is really far away from his partner, he's going to cast his ability very, very quickly, so if they do happen to be very far apart at this point, which shouldn't really ever happen, make sure that you are keeping an eye on his energy, and as soon as he gets to like 64% energy or something, you just stop casting them, because if he is very, very far away from his partner, it will be an instant cast, and you don't want to be locked out for 6 seconds.
At 100% energy, Pole will cast something called Pulverized. This is a 3-part ability where he'll hit the ground 3 times. The very first hit hits every player in the entire raid and deals light physical damage. However, this damage is also spread around them within a 3-yard AoE. So if you are all stacked up on the same point, pretty much you'll all just instantly die. So when this ability does come in, and again it is on a cast time, so you do know when it is about to come in, and of course it comes in at a set energy point, make sure that you are spread at least 3 yards. After you've taken that first hit, the second hit will just cause several spikes to fall from the ceiling, and again, if you're stood inside these, you'll take damage and you'll get knocked back. So make sure that you don't stand in these circles. And the last hit is a ginormous circle that almost always spawns directly underneath the boss, where a huge spike will come from the ceiling and land. This deals more damage the closer you are to it. Really, you just need to make sure that you're stood out of the animation of this, but if you can move really far away just to reduce the damage and it doesn't put much downtime on your DPS or your healing, you might as well. Again, like the Interrupting Shout, you can use a healing cooldown for this if you really want to, but usually it's not completely necessary.
So that's all of the abilities that Pole does, so we're going to move on now to FATBOSS. Now FATBOSS' ability that the tank really needs to worry about is something called Double Slash. He'll periodically hit the tank with both weapons, so he just does a bit more damage. Make sure you use the DR, there's nothing you can really do about it. At 33% energy, FATBOSS will cast Whirlwind. He will start spinning around, dealing large physical damage to anyone inside, and it is very, very big, this circle, I mean huge. So you got to make sure that you really do need to pull FATBOSS out of the group at this point, because otherwise everyone's going to be caught up inside taking a lot of damage. Also, do note that he will follow the tank around with this ability, so you can't place him outside the raid and then the tank will run out of the AoE. The tank needs to stay inside the AoE and take the ticking damage from Whirlwind, otherwise he's just going to chase the tank around.
Now, whatever tank you've assigned to actually be on FATBOSS will also need healers assigned to that tank, because when the tank does move FATBOSS away from the entire raid so he can eat the Whirlwind, he will still need to be healed, so it's important that you have some healers chasing him.
The Whirlwind also will apply a debuff every single tick that increases the damage that you take from Pole's Shield Bash, and this is like pretty much the only reason that you need 2 tanks for this fight, so just make sure that you have 1 tank assigned to one boss and 1 tank assigned to another, and just don't switch between them at any point.
And when the Whirlwind has finally finished, you want to move FATBOSS back to Pole so that their haste is normalized. Now at 66% energy, FATBOSS will cast something called Enfeebling Roar. Now after a short cast, he'll do a shout that will do AoE damage to anyone that stood within 20 yards of him, and it'll also apply a debuff to you that increases the damage you take by a certain percentage. Now the actual percentage of damage you take depends on how many people actually stood within the 20 yards to take the debuff. If no one takes it apart from the tank's going to have an absolutely ginormous damage taken increase on top of him. So it's vital that as many people as possible, ideally the entire raid, stack underneath the boss when this ability comes out, because you want as many people as possible to get this debuff, because the damage increased strength of this debuff is split between the entire raid.
As well as the duration of the ability as well, and with other AoE effects coming in, normally if you all soak the enfeebling roar, the debuff will drop before a huge AoE effect comes in, and it'll just minimize damage across the board.
So again, just for enfeebling roar, as soon as he starts to cast it, you want to make sure everyone's underneath him, and as soon as the cast is finished, everyone needs to then run out. And after this point, of course, tanks, you probably want to keep an eye on that debuff and try and chain cooldowns or get external cooldowns to stay on you just for that duration. At 100% energy, FATBOSS will cast an ability called Quake. As soon as this ability starts, the entire raid will start taking light ticking damage. It's completely unavoidable, you can't do anything about it. However, the boss will also throw weapons on the ground. Now, as you can see on the video, these weapons actually start spewing out fire. If you stand in these fire lines, you'll receive a dot that stacks. And the dot around 4 or 5 stacks is extremely deadly and will pretty much require you to either use a personal cooldown or for your healer to spot heal you. But ultimately, no one should get any stacks at all because this fire is completely avoidable. Now with these fire lines, it's important to note that even though they are a line, by the time it reaches you, it's more likely going to be a wall of fire because they like to move on a diagonal. So when you are moving around them, you need to make sure that you give yourself plenty of room, as you can easily get caught out just because of the way they move. It's very, very awkward. Now for Quake, providing no one gets hit by any fire lines, again you shouldn't need to use any healing cooldowns, but you may require to spot heal people that took fire stacks. But if everyone does it perfectly, you don't need to use any cooldowns at all. So they're all the boss abilities that both of them have. However, like we said at the start of the video, there are certain points of the fight where you can get very scary combinations that can cause you to wipe if you don't use the correct cooldowns or you don't stand in the correct places. Now the reason why you get combos in the first place is because FATBOSS starts on 90% energy and Pulse starts on 0%. So the bosses are always out of sync, which means the encounter itself, you always have different combinations at certain points, especially when you move bosses out and you move bosses in, such as when you need to move FATBOSS out for the whirlwind. So the first deadly combo that you'll come across in the fight is when Pulverized and Enfeebling Shout will go off at almost the exact same time. Now on this crossover point, sometimes the Pulverized is slightly before the Enfeebling Shout, sometimes they're exactly the same time, and sometimes Pulverized is actually after the shout. But the tactic remains the same for all of those points. You need to make sure that you stack underneath the boss for the enfeebling roar. However, you need to be spread out 3 yards because of the first hit of Pulverize that's going to come in. Now, because Pulverize and Enfeebling Shout both do damage, this means you're going to take a big double hit on your entire raid at one point. For this point, you always want to use a healing cooldown, and it's probably a really great idea to use personal cooldowns as well. And because it is very difficult to stack 30 people 3 yards underneath the boss, there are probably a few people that are going to get a double hit of Pulverize, which shouldn't kill them, but if you had the Enfeebling Shout before you had the Pulverize, it could potentially kill them because, of course, you have the damage increase debuff on you. If you're really struggling on this crossover point, you might want to assign certain people to stand in certain locations, or make it so some people don't even run underneath the boss to get the Enfeebling Shout, just to prevent people dying from the Pulverize. And if the Enfeebling Shout is after the Pulverize, once the first Pulverize has gone off, you can then quickly stack underneath the boss, and just don't worry about the circles that are about to fall from the sky. The shout should go off before these spawn. So literally the moment the shout has finished its cast, you want to use Stampeding Roar and everyone spreads out immediately so all these circles don't just land on you.
Now there is another point in the fight where the Enfeebling Roar and the Pulverize are very close together again. However, you do need to deal with it differently because the Enfeebling Roar comes in after the third hit of Pulverize. This is an issue because you're moving around everywhere trying to move out of the Pulverize, and if you are all spread out, you're going to struggle a lot to get back underneath the boss to take the Enfeebling Roar. The best way of dealing with this is trying to remain as a group kind of thing and move towards a same sort of area in the room to move out of the third hit of the Pulverize so you can get underneath FATBOSS as soon as possible to absorb this Enfeebling Roar. Using things like Aspect of the Fox and Stampeding Roar again here will help keep uptime on damage, as well as just making it so players can move more easily.
It is very likely at this point that you're not going to be able to have the entire raid stacked underneath the boss for this enfeebling roar. So tanks, this is an awesome time to save your huge cooldowns because you're going to have a very large damage increase on you for the next 40 to 50 seconds. This fight is really just about using cooldowns when the pulverize and enfeeble are very, very close to each other. And the rest of the time, it's just about using healing cooldowns to sort of keep people topped up. It's completely situational. Assigning healing cooldowns to certain points of the fight isn't really a great idea. You just need to communicate and say what you're doing at what points so none of the healing cooldowns overlap and that you always have something as a backup.
So really, this encounter is all really about the knowledge of the bosses. You just got to know when the abilities come in by tracking, keeping an eye on their energy at the 33, 66, and 100% markers, so you know what abilities are coming in when, and really don't be too set in stone about what you have to do at what points, because the fight does change. Where you have to move because of the fire changes, so maybe the boss overlaps in different ways. It's all a bit all over the place, so really you can't be set in stone when you go into this encounter. You've got to be a bit open-minded, be a bit fluid, and really just know what the bosses are doing and how they do them, and just counter it. It's not too difficult.
But thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help you get a kill, please do drop us down a like. We appreciate it. And if you'd like to see any of our other Highmaul guides, please do click up on the annotations you see on your screen now, and it'll take you straight to those videos.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.